There are 63 national parks in the U.S., not to count the hundreds more national monuments, preserves, and other areas managed by the National Park Service. As an American and someone who loves nature and to travel, they're some of my favorite places to visit. The foundation of the National Park Service kicked off a worldwide trend, and today there are thousands of sites around the world that have been designated as national parks by their respective countries. Other than the Gateway Arch in downtown St. Louis, the country's smallest national park, each represents a natural area, if not pure wilderness, and many of the U.S.'s parks count among the most beautiful and spectacular places in the country, and even the world. There's a feeling of awe I often get when I visit them, that I'm in the presence of something truly magnificent. But of course, there are plenty of other places that seem just as magnificent, and whose beauty is, in my opinion, on par with many national parks. I've had the opportunity to travel through a lot of the U.S., and today I'm going to take you through places I've visited that, in my opinion, could be national parks, but for whatever reason have not yet been granted that status by the federal government. Hello and welcome to That Is Interesting. I'm your host, Carter. Today, we'll explore some of the most beautiful parts of the U.S., places that, in my opinion, should be national parks. This video is, of course, just my personal opinion. I'll share what I'd call the park, where it's located, my reasons for picking it, and what its current status is. I'm going to limit my recommendations to places that I've actually visited. I've been able to visit a number of different states, but there are still some parts of the country I have yet to see. So if you live in any of these states, don't get offended if I didn't include anything from your home state. I've mostly lived in the West Coast and Midwest, so my recommendations will probably skew more Western, on top of the fact that the East is generally much more developed and has less geographic diversity than the states at the west of the Rockies. But I will include a number of recommendations in the eastern half of the country as well. If you have places that you'd include if you were president and got to name new national parks, go share in the comments and let us know. First, I'll start with some honorable mentions. These are places that I've never visited, so I can't definitively speak on them, but that seem pretty spectacular. In Hawaii, Mount Waialeale, the rainiest place on the planet, Waimea Canyon, and the stunning Na Pali coast are all located close together on the island of Kauai. Alaska, easily one of the most beautiful states in the country, has 8 national parks, second to only California, but there are other incredible places, like the Tongass Rainforest, Kodiak Island, Aleutian Islands, and Bering Land Bridge throughout the state. There's the Okefenokee Swamp, split between Georgia and Florida, the White Mountains of New Hampshire, Green Mountains of Vermont, Adirondacks in New York, as well as Niagara Falls, Pictured Rocks in Michigan, and the Apostle Islands in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania's Pine Creek Gorge, Palo Duro Canyon in Texas, Pikes Peak in Colorado, Grand Staircase Escalante in Utah, the Bisty Badlands in New Mexico, Canyon de Chelly in Arizona, the Owyhee Canyonlands in Oregon, and Mount St. Helens in Washington. These are all just a few of the places that I'd love to visit, but as of yet haven't been able to do so, so for now they're just honorable mentions. Now, on to the list. First is what I'd call Scablands National Park. Washington is one of the most stunning places in the U.S., and the Pacific Northwest state is home to 3 national parks, all in the mountains in the western half of the state. The Evergreen State is known for its lush green forests, fjords, and snow-capped mountains, but much of the eastern half of the state is a desert. The Columbia Basin, a huge valley along the Columbia River east of the Cascades, is desert that's been irrigated into farmland, but the landscape itself has been carved and ripped apart. The prehistoric Missoula floods caused a glacial lake to periodically burst free and flood the valley, slicing through existing lava flows. This has left behind what is known as the channeled Scablands, an eerily beautiful landscape of basalt cliffs, long lakes, canyons, empty ravine valleys called coulees where water once flowed, and a spot called Dry Falls, which, though today is completely dried up, remains the largest waterfall we know to have ever existed in the world. The area is a geologist's playground. It has some great hiking and beautiful scenery, but relatively little of the region is currently protected, which would make designating it a national park more difficult, besides the fact that it's spread across a pretty huge section of the state. Moving not far to the south, we have what I'd call Mount Hood National Park, which I'd split between Oregon and Washington. Mount Hood itself is a stunning volcano just east of Portland, and I'd also include on both sides of the river the Columbia River Gorge, just north of the mountain. The Gorge is one of America's most underratedly beautiful canyons, also carved by the Missoula floods. The Columbia River slices dramatically through the Cascades, and all around it are incredible waterfalls like Multnomah and Bridal Veil Falls. Oregon is a state with some pretty incredible natural beauty, but is only home to one park, Crater Lake. Much of the area is already currently protected through a number of recreation areas, as well as Mount Hood National Forest. The deepest canyon in North America isn't the Grand Canyon, it's Hell's Canyon, split between Oregon and Idaho along the Snake River. Hours from any major population center, this is a wilderness that receives few visitors, despite its status as the deepest canyon on the continent. Much of it is already set aside as the Hell's Canyon National Recreation Area, and it would give Idaho, save for the thin strip of Yellowstone that crosses into the state, its first national park. If you don't count that 1% of Yellowstone, which is mostly in Wyoming, Idaho is the only western state with no national parks. And that's kind of a travesty. It's a really beautiful state, and Hell's Canyon would make a great national park. Another Idaho park I'd add is Craters of the Moon. In the agricultural high desert of the Snake River Plain, it's truly one of the strangest landscapes I've ever explored. A lava field larger than Rhode Island, it's a patchwork of volcanoes, cinder cones, lava flows and lava tunnels, underground caves formed by lava flows. The lava field stretches as far as the eye can see and is visible from space. This would be pretty easy to make a national park. It's already set aside as a national monument and preserve, and park infrastructure like a visitor center is already in place. It's a place that's pretty unforgettable to visit and would make a great national park for Idaho. Moving on, we have my home state of California. Now, California, I'd argue, is perhaps the most geographically diverse state in the U.S. It's home to deserts, rolling golden hills, agricultural valleys, lush redwood forests, swamps, snow-capped peaks, and islands in the Pacific, and its 9 national parks are spread across its range of landscapes. It has more national parks than any other state, and in my opinion, some of the best ones. Places like Yosemite, Death Valley, and Joshua Tree are iconic, and other parks like Pinnacles and Channel Islands are beautiful places that fly more under the radar. California, though, has plenty more to offer, and I would personally add 4 more parks from the state. First would be Big Sur. This is a region, a stretch of coastline, currently protected by a number of state parks and national forests, a mostly undeveloped stretch of the Pacific between Carmel and Morro Bay, save for a few small towns. Big Sur's mountains dive dramatically into the sea, creating some pretty incredible views, and it's easily one of the most well-known landscapes in the state. It's a popular route to drive, there's already a lot of camping, and there's some great backcountry in places like the Ventana Wilderness further inland. Just north of San Francisco, Point Reyes would add to what are currently just 3 national parks on the Pacific coast. In one of the most scenic stretches of the California coastline, the point, separated by an inlet formed from the San Andreas Fault, juts off of the Marin headlands like a fishhook. Already protected as Point Reyes National Seashore, its beautiful bays, cliffs, and headlands would make a fantastic national park. Next is what I'd call the Eastern Sierra National Park. The lower 48's tallest mountain range, the Sierra Nevada, is already home to a number of national parks, but their eastern slope gets far less attention. Most Californians live west of the mountains, and it's a steady climb up from the floor of the Central Valley to the High Sierra, so that's how most visitors approach the range. To the east, though, the tallest peaks of the Sierra Nevada plunge spectacularly down to the floor of low-lying valleys like the arid Owens Valley, giving incredible views of the mountain range that you don't get from the Central Valley. The area I'd include in the park lies in the Owens Valley beneath Mount Whitney, the tallest peak in the lower 48, the western half of which is already part of Sequoia National Park, and the Alabama Hills, a beautiful range of rock formations and arches at the base of Whitney. Nearby Manzanar, the site of a World War II-era Japanese internment camp, is an important historical site that could be included within the park as well. Much of the area is already home to campgrounds and trail systems, part of the Alabama Hills National Scenic Area, as well as national forests and historic sites. My final California park would be Lake Tahoe, split between California and Nevada. The country's second deepest lake and the largest by volume outside of just the Great Lakes, Tahoe would probably already have been a national park, were it not so developed already, the popular vacation destination home to busy ski towns like South Lake Tahoe. The lake, which is nothing short of stunning, has sections though on both the Nevada and California sides which remain pretty undeveloped, like the beautiful Emerald Bay. Nevada currently has only one national park, Great Basin, and besides Tahoe, I'd add two more. The first would be Valley of Fire. It's less than an hour from Las Vegas, northeast of the city, near the Virgin River, but it's an entirely different world, a land of red rock formations that stand out sharply from the dark landscape they jut out of. It's a state park, in my opinion one of the best state parks I've ever been to, and a great place to explore. Again, as a state park, it already has lots of trails, access roads, and campgrounds in place. My last Nevada park, one that would be shared with Arizona, is the Black Canyon of the Colorado. It's not as famous as the Grand Canyon or even the now submerged Glen Canyon, but the Colorado River's Black Canyon was deep and narrow enough that it was selected as the site of the Hoover Dam. I kayaked down this canyon, and there's something pretty incredible about seeing the Hoover Dam towering over you from the bottom. The canyon itself and its black volcanic rock formations is gorgeous, and the surrounding mountains are home to herds of bighorn sheep, hot springs, and ghost towns like Nelson, Nevada. It's currently part of the Lake Mead National Recreation Area. Moving fully into Arizona, next is a place that, like Lake Tahoe, is full of natural beauty, but is at the same time pretty developed. Arizona is famous for its red rocks, and one of the best places to see them is the town of Sedona. It's a busy town, often crowded with tourists, but it's not hard to understand why. The rock formations that surround the city are pretty incredible, and places like Cathedral Rock, Bell Rock, and nearby spots like Slide Rock could be incorporated into a park. Many are their own state parks or part of the Coconino National Forest. It would be a great way to also showcase the more lush forests of central Arizona, a state that people often forget isn't all desert. The next two places on this list are different in that I completely get why they aren't national parks. I'm just including them to point out that their beauty is very much on par with the country's parks. Both sit on the land of the Navajo Nation, and considering the terrible history that most tribes have with the federal government, it's completely understandable that they'd oppose giving up any more sovereignty over their land and rather wish to administer these places themselves. The Navajo Nation runs a number of tribal parks on the country's largest reservation, and their Monument Valley on the border of Arizona and Utah is one of the most beautiful places in America, an iconic symbol of the Southwest made famous through countless Western films. Its towering red shale and sandstone buttes, one of many incredible landscapes belonging to the country's largest Native American reservation. The Navajo Nation, larger than West Virginia and 10 of the country's 50 states, stretches into 3 different states and across the border in New Mexico, but still within the bounds of the Navajo Nation is another spectacular landform. Shiprock, an incredible volcanic monolith, rises looking almost like a stone vessel out of the beige landscape that surrounds it. This iconic rock formation with low ridge walls running in multiple directions from it is, like Monument Valley, a sacred site in Navajo religious tradition and is visible from multiple states, another beautiful piece of the Southwest. The American West is home to some pretty spectacular canyons, many of which are national parks, ranging from world-famous gorges like the Grand Canyon, Zion Canyon, and the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, to lesser-known places like the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, one of the country's least visited national parks. Also in Colorado is a pretty incredible canyon, the Arkansas River's Royal Gorge near Canyon City. The gorge is a beautiful enough natural area on its own, but it's also home to an engineering marvel spanned by the Royal Gorge Bridge. The bridge, with a 955-foot drop from its deck to the canyon floor below, was for a while the highest bridge in the world, and though it has since been surpassed by a number of other bridges around the world, it remains the highest in the United States overall. Interestingly, it's technically an amusement park with a lot of adventure park style attractions like a zip line and gondola and so on. One of the best states for national parks is Utah. It has more than any state save for the far larger California and Alaska, and its parks like Zion, Arches, and Bryce Canyon are some of the most beautiful and famed natural wonders in the country. Each spotlights the canyons and rock formations of Utah's mountains and deserts, but currently no park protects one of the largest and most unique geographic features in the state, the Bonneville Salt Flats. The Great Salt Lake is the country's largest saline lake and the largest lake in the lower 48 west of the Mississippi. It's all that remains of Lake Bonneville, a massive prehistoric lake that at its peak stretched across a quarter of Utah and into Nevada and Idaho. The lake drained in the massive Bonneville flood, which ripped massive canyons across its flood path into the Snake River, widening the already existing Hells Canyon. Today, that land that sat beneath the lake is home to the Bonneville Salt Flats, the largest salt flat in North America. Though technically only making up a small portion of the larger Great Salt Lake Desert, the desert itself is in reality an extension of the massive salt flat. It's home to everything from wildlife refuges, state parks, military testing sites, and potash mines, but it's maybe most famous as an international speedway where racers will set land speed records driving across the salt. The flats are a beautiful piece of Utah and would be a national park different from any other in the country. South Dakota is home to 2 national parks, one of my favorites in the country, Badlands, as well as Wind Cave, a small park in the Black Hills. I would extend Wind Cave to encompass Custer State Park, one of the best state parks in the country, and other parts of the mountain range to create Black Hills National Park. The Black Hills are a beautiful mountain range jutting out of the plains and prairies that surround them and are filled with plenty of beautiful and famous sites, whether Wind Cave, Custer State Park's Sylvan Lake, Stone Needles, and bison and pronghorn herds, or the iconic Mount Rushmore, currently a national memorial. The nearby Crazy Horse Memorial is equally impressive, but for reasons of history as well as the fact that it's still under construction, it would probably be better off in private hands. The Black Hills stretch across the border into Wyoming, where the impressive Devil's Tower, a massive stone monolith that was the country's first national monument, would make an excellent addition to the park or even a national park of its own. The West has no shortage of incredible scenery, but there are some great national parks east of the Great Plains as well, and I'd add a few more. West Virginia's New River Gorge, added in late 2020, is as of now the country's newest national park, a long overdue addition for what is arguably one of the most naturally beautiful states east of the Mississippi. I'd add another, elevating Harpers Ferry National Historical Park to full national park status. The town, nestled in a canyon where the Potomac and Shenandoah rivers meet before bursting through the Blue Ridge Mountains, sits at the eastern tip of the state next to Maryland and Virginia, and is a naturally gorgeous area in its own right. Thomas Jefferson himself even said that the view from above the town was one of the most stupendous scenes in nature and worth a voyage across the Atlantic. On top of that, the old colonial town is incredibly picturesque and historically significant, the site of a raid by John Brown, which was one of the major turning points in the build-up to the Civil War, and is filled with hundreds of historical buildings constructed in the early 1800s. The meeting point of the Appalachian Trail and Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Towpath Trail, it's already home to tons of nice hikes, as well as great museums and visitor centers as a national historical park. The Indiana Dunes, another of the country's newest national parks, are a beautiful string of dunes along the southern shore of Lake Michigan and an excellent addition to the country's national parks, but are, in my opinion, only the second most impressive set of dunes on the lake. I'd give the honor of number 1 to the Sleeping Bear Dunes, a national lakeshore further north in the northern lower peninsula of Michigan. These dunes are nearly twice as tall as the Indiana Dunes and offer sweeping views of the Great Lake, surrounded by beautiful northern Michigan forests. They're one of the most impressive natural areas in the Midwest and would make a great national park. I had the privilege of living in the great state of Minnesota for a few years, and like Michigan, its northern forests and lakes give it some of the best natural beauty in the Midwest. I would set aside parts of its Lake Superior shoreline as a North Shore National Park, including the mountains, wild rivers, cliffs, and forests of areas like the iconic Split Rock Lighthouse and nearby Gooseberry Falls, both of which are currently state parks. Lake Superior is pretty beautiful all around, and its shoreline is for the most part pretty wild and sparsely populated. The small cities that do exist, like Duluth, are just a short ways away from some pretty incredible nature. It's not just the 50 states. America's territories are home to national parks as well, currently just 2, Virgin Islands National Park and the National Park of American Samoa, but there are none in the country's largest territory, the beautiful Caribbean island of Puerto Rico. I would elevate the island's El Yunque National Forest to national park status. This is a tropical rainforest, one of the only in the United States, in the mountains on the east side of the island, and is home to beautiful mountains, wild rivers, waterfalls, and plant and animal life that, in a rainforest ecosystem, is different from anything you can find in the U.S. mainland. Finally, for fun, let's add some urban parks. The creation of the Gateway Arch National Park in downtown St. Louis in 2018 was kind of controversial because it was the first ever national park that really didn't include any natural or wilderness areas in it. The country's smallest national park is a city park, one of the best ones in the country, and a place of great historical significance, but a city park nonetheless. Because of that, it's really the one place that a lot of people say shouldn't be considered a national park. It is one though, and so I thought I'd look briefly at a couple of urban parks that, similarly to the Gateway Arch, are beautiful city parks that also have incredible historical significance, to add to the list for fun. The first, staying in Puerto Rico, is what is currently known as the San Juan National Historic Site. The old city of San Juan, nestled on a small islet guarding the mouth of the city's harbor, makes it easily rank among the most beautiful major cities in the United States. Founded by the Spanish, it's one of the oldest colonial cities in the Western Hemisphere, and the National Historic Site encompasses a number of castles and forts, like the Castillo San Cristobal, the largest Spanish fort in the Americas, and the Castillo del Morro, as well as the city walls that line most of the old city. It's a beautiful, well-preserved, and excellent park in one of the country's most beautiful and fascinating cities. Finally, I'd add Washington, D.C.'s National Mall. The mall is easily one of the country's best city parks, running through the heart of the nation's capital, and along with neighboring parks in areas like the Ellipse, Reflecting Pool, and Tidal Basin, is part of a string of parks home to many of the country's most iconic landmarks and national symbols, including the Capitol, White House, Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, Jefferson Memorial, FDR and MLK memorials, World War II, Vietnam, and Korean War memorials, and is flanked by the museums of the Smithsonian Institution, national museums that are some of the best in the country. Another plus, it's already managed by the National Park Service. That's it for this video. I'm curious, have you been to any of the places on my list? Do you agree with any of my recommendations? If you could make new national parks, what are some places you'd add? Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover the countries, cities, people, and places of the world and beyond. These videos will leave you saying, that is interesting.